Hi everybody, this is TheGreenFrog here, and welcome back to another video. Today, I'm going to be doing another math video, and today I'm going to be talking about how to solve basic absolute value equations. So before we get into this, I would just like to make a quick disclaimer that I expect you to come into this video with knowledge on how to solve multi-step equations, normal ones without absolute value, something like this maybe, 2x plus 4 over 5 equals 7.2 or something like that. Like, I expect that when you come into this video, you'll know how to solve something like that, because otherwise you won't be able to know how to solve equations with absolute value in them. So, now that that's over with, so let's get into this. So, first of all, what is absolute value? If you don't know what absolute value is, and here's a quick overview. Basically, the technical definition is the number's distance from zero, and it's used the symbol for it is these vertical bars here. So if you have an x inside here, then this is basically saying the absolute value of x. The bars mean the absolute value. So if you have something like this, which says the absolute value of 4, it's just the number's distance from 0. So if you had a number line, then the number 4 would just be 4 spaces away. Or if you have something like negative 4, you wouldn't say that as negative distance from 0. It's still 4 spaces from 0, so the absolute value is 4. So it's technically the distance from 0, but if you want to do it quickly, then just get rid of the negative sign. So like the absolute value of 5.24 is just 5.24, but then if you were to have the absolute value of negative 5.24, then just get rid of the negative sign. It's just 5.24, positive. So that's basically what absolute value is. So now that you have a quick refresher on that, if you did not remember, now let's get into how to solve equations that have absolute value inside of them. So we'll start with something simple that's very similar to what we just talked about, and it will give you an introduction of how we're going to be able to solve these. Something like the absolute value of x equals 4. Well, we just said when you have the absolute value of a number, you basically just take off the negative sign. So when you solve an absolute value equation, most of the time, as long as the number on the right here, as long as the number on the right, like especially it's something simple like this, as long as the number over here is a positive integer, or it doesn't even have to be an integer, as long as it's a positive number, then there's going to be two solutions for it most likely. So if you look at this, you're trying to figure out what two numbers could you put in the absolute value and get 4. Well, we know one of them, it's quite obvious, just positive 4, because the absolute value of 4 is just 4. Or the other option is that it could be negative 4, because the absolute value of negative 4 is also 4. So in this case, we could have x equals 4 or x equals negative 4. And it is important that the answer is actually both of these. It's not, the or here is not like you can pick one of them. It's you have to write as your answer x equals 4 or x equals negative 4. Now, onto something a bit more complicated. Let's try something like this. Absolute value of x plus 2 equals 6. Now, what we want to do for here is we want to do a similar thing to what we did last time. We're going to be splitting this into two cases. We're going to be looking at the two possibilities. So this entire side over here, this whole side, it has to equal 6, because the only way that this equation can be true would mean that it would say 6 equals 6. Which means that this entire side over here has to equal 6. Now, the thing is that we have absolute value here. So what could be inside this absolute value? We could have a 6, because the absolute value of 6 is 6. Or we could have a negative 6, because the absolute value of negative 6 is also 6. So now that we know, inside the absolute value could be a 6 or a negative 6. So we can say that x plus 2 equals 6 is one possibility, because in that case, this whole side would value to 6, or everything inside the absolute value would be 6, and then the absolute value of 6 is 6, so that would work. Or you could say that x plus 2 equals negative 6, because in that case, this entire thing here inside the absolute value is negative 6, and then when you take the absolute value of that, it becomes the 6 that we want. So now we basically just have to solve both of these equations like normal. So subtract 2 from both sides here to get that x equals 4. And then on this one, we subtract 2 from each side as well, and this gives us the x equals negative 8. And these are our two solutions. We can check this. 4 plus 2 equals 6, or negative 8 plus 2 is negative 6, then the absolute value of negative 6 is 6. So those are the two solutions to something like that. Now we will try something just a little bit different. And if it's like x minus 2 in the absolute value signs, it's basically the same thing. Now let's try something like this. 3 times the absolute value of x equals 6. Now what we're going to want to do here is, the good thing here is that this 3 is outside. Now because the 3 is outside, we don't have to split into cases yet. We can just divide by the 3 on both sides, and that gives us that the absolute value of x equals 2. And we already know how to do something like this. X could be 2, or x could be negative 2. If it's negative 2, then we just take the absolute value of negative 2, which is equal to 2. So that's very simple. But now we're going to try something a little bit different. Once I erase this here, instead of having that 3 outside, we're going to have it inside. So we're going to have the absolute value of 3x equals 6. Now, because this 3 is inside the absolute value, we cannot just divide. We need to split into cases. So the same thing last time. What's inside this absolute value could be either 6 or negative 6. Because if it's 6, then it's just the absolute value of 6 is 6. If it's negative 6, the absolute value of negative 6 is 6. So if I just erase this real quick, we know that 3x could equal 6, because then the absolute value of 6 is 6. Or if 3x equals negative 6, then it'd just basically be saying like this, absolute value of negative 6, and that would equal 6, so that would work as well. So now again, we have solved both these equations. So divide by 3 on both sides for this one, x equals 2 is one answer, and then again divide by 3 on both sides, and here we get that x could also equal negative 2. Now again, let's check. So the absolute value of 3 times 2 is 6, which means the absolute value of 6 equals 6, which it does, or the absolute value of 3 times negative 2 could equal 6, which means that the absolute value of negative 6 equals 6, which it does. So those both check out. Now, I'm going to show you something a little bit different here. Trying to go through this as quick as possible because I don't want this to be a super long video, and I also want to make sure that I can get through all the basic topics I'm going to be covering and that I want to cover in this video. So now the next thing is if we have something outside, like addition or subtraction outside. So if we have something like the absolute value of x plus 2 minus 2 equals, we will say 4. So now look, this negative 2 or this minus 2 is outside of the absolute value. So what we want to do here is we want to get this absolute value here alone on its own side. So because this is outside the absolute value, we can just get rid of it like normal. So now we have that the absolute value of x plus 2 equals 6. And if you remember this from last time, x plus 2 could be 6, or x plus 2 could be negative 6, because then you take the absolute value, and that is 6. Subtract 2 from both sides, and x could equal 4, or if you subtract 2 from both sides here, x could equal negative 8. Again, let's check this. That's saying that 4 plus 2 here is 6. The absolute value of 6 is 6. Subtract 2 equals 4. Or if we have negative 8, the absolute value of negative 8 plus 2 is negative 6. The absolute value of negative 6 is 6. Subtract 2, and that does equal 4. So those are our two solutions there. Now that we've covered all the basic stuff, and if you have something slightly different than that, you should be able to figure it out. Now we're going to be trying some slightly weirder stuff. So now we're going to look at something like this. The absolute value of x minus 4 plus 3 equals 3. Now again, we're going to be doing a similar thing as last time. Because this plus 3 is outside the absolute value, we can subtract it from both sides. And now we get the absolute value of x minus 4 equals 0. So if we wanted to try to split it into two cases like last time, this is what we'd get. So we'd get x minus 4, well, could equal positive 0, or x minus 4 could equal negative 0. Like, negative 0 is just 0. You can't have positive and negative 0 be different versions of 0. They're the same thing because it's just 0. Negative 0 is 0. So when you have something like this, where you have absolute value on one side and you just have a 0 on the other side, then there's only going to be one solution, because it makes no sense to solve for x minus 4 equals negative 0 over here, because negative 0 is the same thing as 0. So we might as well not even do this one. Because it's 0, we only have to solve for one thing, add 4 to both sides, and x could be 4, just like that. And in this case, that's our only answer, because 4 minus 4 is 0, the absolute value of 0 is 0, plus 3 equals 3. If we were to try something different, like negative 4, we'd get like the absolute value of negative 8 is 8 plus 3 is 11 and not 3. So in this case, there's only one solution. And that's a bit weird, but once we get that all sorted out, I'm just going to erase this. And I have one last thing to showcase in this video. Like I said, not going into anything super complex here. This is a video on basic things about absolute value equations. So now the last thing that I'd like to go over here is, we've already talked about absolute value equations with 2 solutions. We've talked about them with 1 solution, and now we're going to talk about them with no solutions. So if you think about something, what did we say earlier? We said something like the absolute value of 6 equals 6, and the absolute value of negative 6 equals also positive 6. So if you had something over here, like the absolute value of what could equal like negative 4, well, the answer is there's really no real number it's going to work for there, because when you have this, no matter what that is, positive or negative, this is always going to be positive here. So if you make that negative, no answer is going to work for that side. So if we have something like this, so if I erase all this stuff and write another equation, then I'm going to say the absolute value of 2x plus 1 equals, and then we'll do minus 2 equals, let's say, 1. No, I should not say that. Plus 2 equals 1. Now, what we would do here is we would subtract 2 from both sides, so do this and do that, and then we get that the absolute value of 2x plus 1 has to equal negative 1. But the thing here is that this doesn't work. The absolute value, no matter what x is over here, this whole side over here would have to equal a negative, which doesn't work, because the only thing over here is the absolute value. So whatever you have inside these absolute value bars here, whether it's positive or negative, is going to be turned positive by these absolute value bars. So there's no answer that would get you negative 1 over here. So the answer to this one is actually no solution, because there is no real number that you could substitute for x that you could make this work, because no matter what you have over here, if it's negative 1, the absolute value bars will make it positive 1. If it's positive 1, they'll also make it positive 1. So because these absolute value bars are the only thing over here, nothing outside of them, and you have a negative number over here, there's actually going to be no solution for that equation. So I think that's all I wanted to show you in this video. Sorry it's getting a bit long, but I wanted to make sure I covered everything from the very basics of what is absolute value to getting into slightly more complicated stuff. 2 solutions, 1 solution, no solution, all kinds of stuff like that. One more note I'd like to make: if you have something like 2 times the absolute value of x plus 1 equals 4 or something, do not distribute the 2. You don't do that when there's absolute value. Just divide both sides by 2 to get rid of that and get the absolute value of x plus 1 equals 2. And then you should be able to solve it from there. Just make sure that you do not distribute here. Just divide each side by 2. And if you had like a plus 1 over here, just subtract the 1 first. Don't distribute it. So yeah, so there you go. So I hope you enjoyed this little video. Please leave a like on it if it helped you, and please feel free to leave a comment down in the comment section if you have a suggestion for a future video, or a just general comment or question about what we're doing in this video. Yeah, and I hope this helps you out. Please leave a like on the video and subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you next time for another video. Goodbye!